Good morning. Good morning. We are now live on Facebook and on YouTube. I see people are logging on and already sharing their greetings. Thank you very much. Please do. If you're logging on now, we'd love to know you're joining us. So just mention in the comments a good morning greeting. Thank you to those already who have done so. Morning, Monday morning, a brand new week. A new book of Bamidbar. A new parsha, Bamidbar. Fantastic morning ahead. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna respond to the messages that are coming through now. So please do comment. Please do post. So let's see who's here already. So thank you for your comments already. Those who are here, those who have messaged us on the chat. I'd like to acknowledge your messages. Good morning, Shirley Feldman and Bernice Krause and Shimon Perez. Thank you, Mark Machenheim, Ruth Kaplan. Thank you. And Hack, Linda and Jaime Drew, Michael Stein, Boker Tov, Daniela Castleson, Daniela, good to see you here. Hey, welcome. Norman Stein, Boker Tov. So our numbers are going up. It's a brand new morning. If you're logging on to YouTube, just let us know you're here. We'd love to hear from you. Love to know that you're here with us. David Ginsburg, good morning. I see our numbers on YouTube are going up too. Arlene Udelovitz, thank you for joining. Thank you. Raylene Braz, good morning on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being part of this. Good to connect. This must be some record for attendance at a daily shir. Exactly. We've got an ongoing student base here, Michael. Our numbers are hovering 35, 40 students every morning. So absolutely. Hilton Sawitsky, I'm happy. Thank you. You enjoyed yesterday's. Thank you very much. Haley Lipworth, Boker Tov. Thank you. So we're going to give it a couple of minutes just to allow people to come on. If you're just logging on, please share with us. I'd like to engage with you. I'd like to hear from you. Okay, right. Look at this crowd. For 40 days or more. Michael, absolutely. We've been doing this for 40 days. Wow. Since lockdown started, pretty much. We've been going strong every morning. Let's not give in. Brian and Helen Feinstein, Felicia Jenks, Marlene Scher. Oh, I love seeing you all here every morning. It makes my morning. It motivates me to keep it going. So thank you for being here. Manfred Kalnick, Sharon Diamond. Fantastic. If you're just joining on YouTube, let us know you're with us. Michael Stein, the question is like this. Here's the question, Michael. Once lockdown is over, then what do we do? Do we keep this 10:30 slot going? That's going to be the big question. At the moment, we have a fantastic crowd. Close to 30 students already who are online with us. Live. We'll just give it another minute or so to allow for people to log on. Good morning, Shalom Triga. Thank you. We're all going to be so learned. We're going to live in Yerushalayim. Amen, Michael. Mm-hmm. Amen. From your mouth to God's ears. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've hit our 30 students. Fantastic. I'm gonna get going. Hopefully, our numbers will continue to go up as we get going here. I hope you're all keeping well. I hope you had a fantastic weekend, Shabbos and Sunday. And we're on for another week, ready to box away and to deal with the challenges of the week. We've spoken about languages, and that's what I wanted to focus on today. Languages. What language was the Torah written in? What language was the world created in? Reshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created, and we know that He created it by Sarah Ma'amarot, with the 10 utterances. What was the language that God created the world? What was the language that He taught the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu? What was the language that Moshe spoke to the Jewish people? That's going to be our focus of today, is understanding the importance of languages. We know that, good morning, Ian. We know that the Torah was written, the world was created. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to God in Lashon HaKodesh. It's called the holy language. Lashon HaKodesh. Boker Tov. Thank you, Robert Levy. Very appropriate. Shelley Smith, thank you. Lashon HaKodesh was the language that was spoken. And I pointed out a couple of weeks back, Michael Stein says we've been doing this for over 40 days and 40 nights. I can say a few weeks back, we pointed out that Anoichi, the first word of the Ten Commandments, as we're getting ready for Shavuot, the first word of the Ten Commandments, Anoichi, is actually Egyptian. And that's why that word sticks out, because it's not the norm of the Lashon HaKodesh, of the Hebrew language that we're used to when it comes to Torah learning and God's words to Moshe. Anoichi is Egyptian. And we ask then the question, why Egyptian? And the answer is because God wanted to permeate even the nations of the world represented by Egypt. So Anoichi, I am God. I'm not just God for the Jewish people. I'm not just God for Lashon HaKodesh. I am God who permeates every single being, even the Egyptians and Umot HaOlam, the nations of the world. That's why the first word of the Ten Commandments was written in Egyptian, Anoichi. Or for example, here's an interesting one. When it comes to the parsha of Tefillin, which features in the Shema, we say the word Ula Totafot. That word Ula Totafot is not Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. Rashi points out it's actually got to do with African. Other languages that assisted, which is interesting why Tefillin, God used a different word called Ula Totafot. That's an interesting one. So that's the exception to the rule. But the general rule was that Torah generally was written in 70 languages. Lashon HaKodesh. The Torah was said, should I say, in Lashon HaKodesh, in one language, the Hebrew language. That's the Jewish language. Nonetheless, Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert was told to write out the Torah, whatever the Torah consisted of at that point in time, because they obviously hadn't gone through the entire journey of the Jewish people. But whatever that Torah consisted of, Moshe was told to write out. He actually wrote it on stone. He was told to write out the entire Torah, and the terminology that's used in the Torah is the words Be'er Heitev, which Be'er Heitev means explain it nicely, explain it properly. In fact, if you look in the book called the Shulchan Aruch, there's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Code of Law, called Be'er Heitev. Where did they get it from? Got it from this parsha, the parsha that speaks about, not this week's parsha, but the parsha that speaks about the writing of the Torah in a clear language, as Moshe Rabbeinu was told to do on the rock, on the stone. Moshe was told to write out the Torah, Be'er Hetev, in a clear language. And that's where this commentary got his name from, Be'er Hetev. Good morning, Dennis Bessarabi on YouTube. Thank you. Our numbers are going up on YouTube. If you're just logging on Facebook or YouTube, please do let us know you're here just by sharing your greetings in the comments in the chat. We'd love to hear from you personally. So what does it mean that Moshe was asked to Be'er Hetev, to explain things clearly, to write it out clearly? So the commentaries point out, Rashi and others point out, that Moshe was asked to actually write out the Torah in 70 languages. In 70 languages, he was told to write it out. I don't know how he had enough space on this stone. No idea. How we've reached 40 students, guys. 40 students between Facebook and YouTube. So there you go. Michael Stein, 40 days plus of these daily shiurim. And now we're on 40 students who have now logged on and are live with us. Thank you all for joining us. It's great to be here with you on another fantastic morning. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote out the Torah in 70 languages. I don't know how he had moon. Yali Friedman, thank you for commenting. Good morning. Thank you, Yali. Appreciate that. So I don't know how he had room. Where do you have room to write 70 languages on the stone in the desert? But nonetheless, that's not for us to figure out. Why did God ask him to write it out in 70 languages? It's because God said, although Lashon HaKodesh is the chosen language, although Lashon HaKodesh is the godly language, it's a Jewish language, I want to cater for those that speak other languages besides Lashon HaKodesh. Besides Lashon HaKodesh. There are people that speak English or French or Russian or Zulu or whatever other, and all languages were included. Torah tells us there were 70 languages of the world, between Africa and Egypt and wherever else they were going to live and are living. It's irrelevant. 70 languages. Moshe was told, Be'er Hetev, to write out the Torah in those 70 languages. That's called Be'er Hetev, explaining it clearly so that people in other languages and future generations and people in all over the world, Jews and non-Jews, will have the opportunity to be able to study Torah and learn and understand God's word, even if it's not Lashon HaKodesh. So what do we see here? We see that the ideal, or the first language, should we say, everyone's got a first language, right? The first language of Judaism, the first language of Jews, should be Lashon HaKodesh, because that's the language that God created the world with. It's the language he wrote the Torah with. That's right. Then comes the next step, and that is all other languages. Be'er Hetev, Moshe was told to write out all other languages. Thank you. I love your engagement, guys. You're now commenting. Thank you, Michael Stein, for the compliment, and Hilton Sawitsky. I see Shimon Perez writes as follows. We know that when one is davening with a minyan, he can daven in the language he understands. But when davening b'yachid, he should daven in Lashon HaKodesh. Why is this? Interesting point, Shimon. Let's address that. Hey, I'll come to that. I want to unpack your question and your assumption also. So give us a second. We'll just unpack this topic. So now we got Be'er Hetev. I just want to touch upon this point of the 70 languages. The Talmud, the Gemara in Sota tells us, and I know that some of you have learned Gemara Sota before, especially those who have participated in Rabbi Goldman's Gemara Shir, just finished Gemara Sota. We know that when Yosef was growing up, the Talmud tells us that he was taught 70 languages. He was a clever boy. And besides Lashon HaKodesh that was spoken then by Yaakov and his children, Yosef was taught 70 languages. It says that he couldn't get the last one properly. He couldn't get all of them. They weren't sticking in his head. So the Gemara tells us that Yosef was actually called sometimes in the Torah Yehosef. Not Yosef, but Yehosef. A hey was added into his name. Why was a hey added there? Because the Malach, Gabriel, says the Gemara, was trying to teach Yosef all 70 languages, and he wasn't getting it. So they added on a hey, God's name, to Yosef's name, and that enabled him to absorb and to get the languages in his mind. Give one guess. I'm going to share this with you and you can share the answer with us. Give us one guess why the angel needed to educate Yosef with the 70 languages of the world. Please share that with us. Why did the angel have to share with Yosef, teach him the 70 languages of the world? I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to pause for a moment and allow you to interact with me, which is the ideal, right? To have interaction, teacher, rabbi. Let's get this going, the conversation. Why was Yosef taught 70 languages? Please do assist us. We'd love to hear from you. Any suggestions? Who knows why Yosef was taught 70 languages? Okay, no answers? All right, I'll share with you. Yosef was destined to end up in Egypt. He wasn't going to be a simple Jewish boy living in Eretz Israel. He was going to end up in Chutz La'aretz. Good. Thank you, Shimon. He was going to be a minister in Egypt. So as a young boy already, they were preparing him for this. Finance minister, right. So as a young boy, they were preparing him for this. And what happened when he was in Egypt? What happened is that the nations of the world started gathering because they were hungry. So they started sending messengers to Egypt because they knew that there was a viceroy, there was a leader called Yosef living in Mitzrayim. He somehow had food, and they all traveled towards Egypt to get food. Who do you think spoke to them? Yosef spoke to them. Thank you, Aline, Shirley, thank you. Good. As a viceroy, he had to deal with all the people coming to bargain for food. Exactly. So with all the languages that he had, he was able to speak. Can you imagine? It just shows you how, thank you, Helen. It just shows you how certain things that happen to you as young children, it happened to us as young children, mold us, right? And Shimon, we're coming to your point in a moment. It molds us. So someone who has multiple languages can do multiple things as an adult, right? There's different things that happen to us as children. We don't understand the reason for it as a child. But later on, we start to realize why that happened to us. Why did I study engineering when I was a child? Or why did I love watching my father in the garage changing tires? Or why did I, go to public speaking when I was a child? It's just amazing how things that happen when you're a child really form you later on. So Yosef was actually being prepared, groomed for this experience in Egypt. He was being taught all these languages, 70 languages. And as Shimon Peres and Shalom Trika write correctly on Facebook, that's the famous story that when he comes down to Egypt, he realizes that Paroi doesn't know Lashon HaKodesh. Paroi doesn't know Lashon HaKodesh, and Yosef tries to teach it to him. And Paroi can't get it. He can't get the language. You see, Yosef had the extra hey added to his name. He became Yehosef. But Paroi just couldn't absorb, he just couldn't get that last language of Lashon HaKodesh. And so then he made Yosef swear that he would never tell anyone that he knows more languages than the king himself. And that was in good, that helped Yosef later on. Because later on, when Yosef wanted to bury Yaakov Avinu, when he wanted to bury his father Yaakov, and he asked Paroi, can I take my father out of Egypt? And I want to walk to Shechem to bury him in the promised land. And Paroi said, I don't want to let you go. You can't go. We need you here. And Yosef said, but I made a promise. I made a promise to my father that I would take him out. So Paroi says, let your promise go. He said, if I let that promise go, I'm going to let the other promise go too, which was a promise that they made that he wouldn't expose Paroi for not knowing the 70th language. And so Pharaoh was forced to let Joseph leave Egypt, even as a viceroy, to leave Egypt to go bury Yaakov, his father, in Shechem in Israel. Back to why did I mention this? I mentioned this because of the Be'er Heitev, the concept of writing out the Torah in other languages. Shimon, I got your question. We'll get to that in a moment. It's interesting how we're living in a time when there's been more translations of the Siddur, of Torah, of books, of Mishnah, of Gemara. We now have English translations and Russian translations and French translations. It's unbelievable. The Art Scroll has a set in English and a set in Hebrew. When I say Hebrew, that means Ivrit, modern day Hebrew, and we'll get onto that discussion too at some point. Is we now have English and Ivrit, modern day Hebrew translations of the Art Scroll. It's unbelievable the amount of translations that we have today. Obviously, with the use of technology, the use of digital, the use of printing, it's made it a lot easier today than to write and to translate famous texts. You don't have to be in one room writing. You can be living in different countries, and all the writers and the authors are sharing information with each other. It's a changed world of today. And today there are documents and there are books and books being written in different languages to allow for different people to study different texts and to make it more accessible, more easy. You know when this all started? This all started in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, Ba'er Heitev, or even in the days of Yosef. But in the days of Yosef, when Yosef knew 70 languages, no one else knew 70 languages. Meaning no one else within the Hebrew Jewish community knew 70 languages. Yosef was unique. Moshe Rabbeinu knew 70 languages and started to write out these languages, write out the Torah for these languages. But even then, who knew those languages? We knew Lashon HaKodesh at that point in time. Moshe was preparing, for the nations of the world. That's true. So people who pass by and see this should be able to connect to the Torah that God gave. But Moshe was preparing for generations down the line who may not have Lashon HaKodesh as their first language. And therefore, he was writing it out in different languages. That was the purpose, to write out in different languages. This is now being fulfilled. That time of Moshe Rabbeinu, 3,000 years ago, is now being fulfilled more than ever in our generation. In the last 40 years, 50 years, since books started to be translated, and now in the last 10, 20 years, even more than ever before, this is the fulfillment of the Be'er Heitev, of the instruction that Moshe was told to write down the Torah. Right, in different languages. Shimon's coming with another question here. Shimon, thank you for sharing. Let's see your question here. Shimon writes, apologies for all the questions. No need to apologize. But I heard there's a law that the written Torah can only be written in Hebrew and Greek. How did this contradict what Moshe did, translating it into so many languages? I'm not sure that the written Torah can only be written in Hebrew and Greek. I'm not so sure about that. I disagree. Shimon, there was a story in the Talmud with Talmai HaMelech. Talmai HaMelech at that time was ruling over Israel of Greek. He was from Greece, and they wrote out the Torah for him in Greek. That's true, because he requested a translation. So they wrote it out for him. But I'm not sure that Torah can't be written in other languages. We've got to verify that, because we definitely have Chumash today. Look at the Art Scroll. It's English. There's Hebrew. There's all sorts of translations today of the Chumash. Morning, Neil Herman. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Any questions you'd like to ask on this topic of languages? I'm going to come back to Shimon's question about davening just now. I'll come back to that. But please do share with us. We're busy discussing Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language. We're discussing the 70 languages of the world, Umot HaOlam. That's Be'er Heitev. Writing out the translation into 70, the Torah into 70 languages. Right, so Shimon, to come to some of your questions, and thank you for being so engaging on this platform. I appreciate that. To come to some of Shimon's questions. Shimon asked earlier a question. I'm going to come to this question soon, but Shimon asked earlier a question about Why is it that according to the Talmud and Halacha, when davening with a tzibur, when davening with a community, one can daven in any language they wish. But when davening on their own, one should stick with Lashon HaKodesh. So it's not so simple, Shimon. We need to clarify this. When one is in a community, in the shul, with the chazan, and please God, that happens very soon for all of us, amen. When one is sitting inside shul, obviously the chazan represents them. The Baal Tefillah represents the community. And so he's saying it in Lashon HaKodesh. And he's representing us. He's called the Shaliach Tzibur. So he represents the community. He's saying it in Lashon HaKodesh. So the rest of the congregation, the rest of the community, can say it in whatever language they choose to. So that explains why when you're davening in a minyan, you're able to daven in whatever language you want. In terms of davening on your own, Shimon writes earlier in one of the comments that when davening on one's own, one should daven in Lashon HaKodesh. I think we need to understand the context there. I'm not sure if that applies to everybody. Not everyone is able to daven in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, while they're davening on their own. Not so simple. Not everyone knows Lashon HaKodesh. And not everyone knows Lashon HaKodesh, and therefore not everyone can be expected to daven in Lashon HaKodesh. That's not possible. So, Shimon, maybe that's the halacha, that ideally someone should daven in Lashon HaKodesh when they're home, ideally on their own. But for practical sense, for the community that we're working with here in South Africa, many people cannot daven in Lashon HaKodesh at home, and we need to understand that. Now, that doesn't mean one shouldn't try. Obviously, one should try to read more and more in Lashon HaKodesh. Why? Because that's the original language. Even in shul, we should try and read more and more of Lashon HaKodesh. In shul, at home, the more we become comfortable with Lashon HaKodesh, with the original text of davening in the original language, is definitely ideal. Because that's the language of the Torah. That's the language of creation. That's the language of God. The language of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's definitely preferable to daven in Lashon HaKodesh. Absolutely. But if you've got difficulty or it's too slow, then one can definitely rely on the other languages. We see the credit that Moshe Rabbeinu, by the word of God, gives to the other languages. The credit he gives the 70 languages, that they carry weight and they're valuable and they're precious. So Shimon, I hope that answers your question. Right, laning. So your question about laning. No, we don't lane in other languages. We want to lane in the language in which the Torah was written. The Art Scroll and all other Chumashim are translations of it. It's not the original text. It's not the original text. We want to lane the original text. Maybe what you're suggesting is we should do both. Maybe you're suggesting we should do both. Lane for the original text and then have a translator. In fact, we know in the times of the Talmud, that's how they used to lane from the Chumash. They used to lane in times of the Talmud. They used to lane the Chumash in Hebrew and then translate it into Aramaic for everyone else to understand it. So maybe that's what you're suggesting, Shimon, is that the Baal Korah should get up, lane the laning, and then have the translation written out, laned together with the Hebrew. It's called the Maturgamon. It's the translator. Interesting suggestion. Here's another suggestion. Here's another suggestion for you and for all of you. You know, the Chazan, or all of us, should I say, the Chazan, for example, davens, let's say, in Lashon HaKodesh, quietly to himself. And he davens Lashon HaKodesh, and then it comes a time for the repetition. The Amidah. Now, why is he doing the repetition? He just said the davening earlier. He just said his Shemona Esrei. So why is he going back now to say it again? Ever thought about that? Why is he going back to say the Amidah again? So the answer is because there were people in times of old that could not read Hebrew. A, they couldn't read Hebrew, or B, they didn't have Siddurim. There weren't print houses, as we said earlier. There weren't print houses like there are today. So if there's no print houses like there are today, then they weren't able to read properly. So therefore the Chazan would then do a repeat. The Chazan would do a repeat Amidah. And he would do the repetition for the community. Now, what's the point of doing the repetition in Lashon HaKodesh if people are ignoramuses, Am Haaretz, Amaratzim, they don't have a siddur in front of them, they don't know how to read, so he's doing it again in Hebrew. So if I dare to suggest, based on Shimon's suggestion of having laning in Hebrew and in English, that maybe the Chazan's repetition should be done in English. In other words, let him say the Amidah in Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, together with the whole community. And when he does the repetition, he should do the repetition in English for everyone to hear it. Okay, the answer is, well, I don't really have an answer, but the answer is that that's pushing the boundaries a little too much. He's pushing the boundaries somewhat. So we don't do it. The Chazan always does the repetition in the original text of Lashon HaKodesh, even though we could debate maybe we need to have it in a different language. Maybe the laning should be read in Hebrew and then English. Maybe the Amidah should be davened in Lashon HaKodesh, followed by English too. Shimon continues to post here on Facebook. Apologies, Rav. I would like to correct myself. When naming children, one should name their children Hebrew names. And from the Gemara you mentioned earlier, may also name their children Greek names. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm not sure. Interesting about the Greek names. Where's that from? Why do we name Greek names, Shimon? One should definitely. Okay, that ties into another discussion. Let's touch upon that for a moment. Names and the language of names. One can't underestimate the power of a name in the original Lashon HaKodesh, in the original language. That is God's language. God knows you by your Hebrew name and your mother's Hebrew name or your father's Hebrew name. God doesn't recognize English names. The reality is that English names were created for an English world, for an Anglo world, for a secular world. But Hebrew names, I'm touching upon Shimon's comment just now about the names of Hebrew. I'm touching upon Shimon's comments regarding Hebrew. The power of names in Hebrew, and therefore, names are important. And therefore, if a person can use their Hebrew name, why not? There has always been a tendency to have an English version of our names, or an English name and a Hebrew name. That's definitely not the way it was. The way it was that everyone had Hebrew names, because that's Lashon HaKodesh. It's the Hebrew language of God. And we should use our Hebrew names confidently and proudly. Yeah, maybe in the workplace, in a secular environment, we prefer to use an English name. But within the shul space and the Jewish community space, Hebrew names is Lashon HaKodesh. It's the original language. Ba'er Heitev, the 70 languages that Moshe wrote the Torah in, that came secondary. That's second in line. When we need to rely on them for English and French and Russian, we do. But ideally, the original language is Lashon HaKodesh. The Hebrew name of Hashem, the holy language of Hashem, the same language. And in fact, the Kabbalists tell us that the Hebrew lettering of our name is like a combination lock. If you get one digit wrong in the combination lock, you won't manage to unlock the combination lock. You have to have your spelling of your Hebrew name perfectly correct. If someone was to stop you and ask you, how do you spell your Hebrew name? Could you tell them? If someone stopped to ask you, how do you spell your English name? Could you tell them? That's a real test. Funny, because I once heard a funny anecdote. If you ask someone, if you're stopped and asked, who was Yoshka? Yoshka's mother's name. Everyone knows Yoshka's mother's name. Mary. But if someone stopped you to ask you what was Moshe's mother's name, do you know that? I'm sure many of you do, but many don't. It's Yocheved. Yocheved was Moshe Rabbeinu's mother's name. So too, if someone asked you your spelling of your English name, do you know the spelling? You sure do. If someone asked you the spelling of your Hebrew name, would you know how to spell it out? That's the message of today. That Lashon HaKodesh is the original language that God chose to create the world, to write the Torah. It's our obligation to be able to touch and use Lashon HaKodesh first as the first language for all of us. And then comes the other languages of the world. There's more to discuss here, but I'm gonna cut it short here, and we perhaps can continue this conversation tomorrow. If there's any questions or comments you'd like to share with us at this point in time, please do. Thank you, Shimon, for being so active here today. You've been on fire. Shkoyach. Thank you all for joining us for another daily session of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. We've had between 30 and 40 students here today, so it's been fantastic to have you all. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your greetings as you've shared with us across the both platforms. And I wish you a wonderful day ahead. Keep safe, keep sane, and now I like the word, keep spiritual. Take care and have a wonderful day ahead.